I'm Fareed Haq, and you're watching ForGuitarPlayersOnly.com.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching ForGuitarPlayersOnly.com. We're coming to you on location from the Jazz Cafe at the Music Hall in Detroit with the Billy Cobham Band with the guitarist Fareed Haq. How are you, Fareed?
It's good to be here. It's great to be seen and be playing out here in Detroit.
It's great to see you. Great to hear you play. You know what? I saw you one time, a long time ago, in Miami. I think it was around 1992 with Paquito de Rivera.
There's a story behind that gig. There's a story.
Let's start there.
That was my very first Paquito gig. And Paquito, I had sat in with him a few times, and he started sending me postcards, like funny postcards, like he'd send, like gag postcards, every once in a while, and I was like, that's kind of odd. And then I think it was his way of kind of saying, you got the gig, just hang tight till I get, an opening for you, And so then he calls you up and he says, we got a gig in Miami, so fly on down. So I got the ticket.
Fly on down from where?
Chicago, Chicago, right? So I get there. There's no one to meet me at the airport, right? I had heard that his manager had said that the hotel was around the airport. So I got in a cab. This was back in the day, a regular old cab. And I said, drive around the airport in a circle, because you can go around Miami International. And let's just
know it well.
Hotels, right?
Yeah.
I found my hotel. Then I got checked into the hotel, just by luck. Then I go down to the venue, and this was in Paquito's wilder days. And there's nobody there except like the club owner. And he's like, I said, do you have a guitar amp? He's like, oh yeah, we have an amp for all of you. I said, okay. And I look in the corner, and there's an old Shure Vocal Master PA, which is like a dinosaur, right? He's like, is that good for you?
I used to own one.
Right?
Yes.
We all, unfortunately, did, right? And he says, and this is for the bass, and for the guitar, and for the keyboard. Is that okay? And I said, not so much. So here I am, like the audition gig, first gig, right? And I'm like going with the sound guy down to the music store and saying, we got to rent an amp and a keyboard and this, and we got it all on stage. And the gig was supposed to start at 9. People start showing. It's Miami.
Yeah.
It's that part of Miami. The gig's supposed to start at 9, so people start showing up at 10. Paquito and the rest of the band show up around 11.
Yeah.
And they are enthusiastic, to say the least, if you get my drift. And we had a great night. We had a blast. But it was like trial by fire.
It was. I'm trying to remember. Was it Ignacio Berroa? Was he?
Ignacio Berroa, that's right. Wow. And the brothers, the one who played bass and one who plays keyboards, Horta.
Oh, Nicky and Mike.
Yes, Nicky and Mike Horta. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
They were playing. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they're both great guys, great players. Well, let's talk a little bit about you, because you have such a fascinating background. I know you're half Pakistani, half Chilean, and you've been all over the world. What about your initial exposure to music and how you became a guitar player?
I have to say, the older you get, the more you realize how much you owe to your roots. And, my mom and dad are great music lovers. And my mother from Chile, loved the guitar. We had Segovia Records and Ray de la Torre Records. We had Pat Martino. We had Dave Brubeck.
I saw Segovia once, about a mile from here.
Right. I saw him when I was a kid. My parents took me. We had a great time.
Who said? Okay, let's go to the dressing room.
Let's do that. I was getting pretty good, though.
Hi again. We are at the same venue, but we got kicked off the stage because the house is opening, sold-out house for the Billy Cobham show. So
apparently they've broken a few fire codes to get all the people in.
Maybe we should edit that part out. But I don't want to start again, because the energy from that Paquito de Rivera story, you'd never be able to duplicate. So let's just say that was the beginning, and here we are continuing. You were talking about Segovia, you were talking about Pat Martino, and one end of the spectrum to the other. But I'm just trying to get a sense for how you became a guitar player, and maybe who some of your music heroes, your guitar heroes were when you were coming up.
It's interesting, because when I was a kid, and I showed interest in the guitar. First, I played the piano and the bass a little bit. My parents were super interested in music, and my mom went to the local record store, which at the time there were record stores, right? And said,
So you grew up in Chicago?
yeah, absolutely, right. And that's what I like to say is my mother's from Chile and my dad is from Pakistan, but I'm from Chicago. Okay. And there's a reason for that because I started playing the blues in a lot of bands. And
Blues in Chicago?
yeah, right. And I didn't realize that that was a weird thing until years later when I got out of Chicago and but said, let's play some blues, and everybody was like, they didn't have that same level of familiarity with that genre. But so my mother went out to buy me some records. So, what guitar records should I get my son? And she got me Elegant Gypsy.
Al Di Meola.
Yep, Bright Size Life. And Joyous Lake.
Wow.
And basically, if I was to say what my influences are, I'd say Elegant Gypsy, Bright Size Life, and Joyous Lake. And maybe throw in there, the McLaughlin music, Shakti and those kind of things. But I mean, it's kind of telling that I'm absolutely the product of my environment, and I take very little credit for it because, man, I'm playing all this world music, and then I get called by the Radiators to jam, a New Orleans rock band, and I walk up there, and they look at me in my Indian clothes, and they're like, I said, I'm just gonna play some blues, so don't worry, it'll be fine. And we just jammed all night long, had a great time, and so that connection I think between world music and blues has brought a lot of disparate elements together for me, which, it makes me a little outside of the box, but then also at the same time inside the box, because the blues is in everything that I play, even if sometimes it's music you wouldn't think the blues is in there, classical music or Baroque music.
You're your own little melting pot. We're here at the Billy Cobham gig. You just got back from Hawaii. Yes. Yeah, welcome to Detroit from Hawaii. Yeah, it's which is more paradise-like. Anyway,
yeah, right.
I've been following Billy Cobham's music since the 70s. My best friend for over 40 years, still my best friend to this day. Hey, Friedbaum. We used to go see Billy Cobham with Alvin Baptiste and who was Randy Jackson was playing bass, and I think Mark Soskin on keyboard. This is like 1977, and we've seen him several times since. But tell me about your experience playing in this band with Billy Cobham.
I think this is a little bit of a different experience for us and for Billy. I mean, I've done the leader thing a lot, and I've done the sideman thing a lot. With Zawinul, with Paquito, obviously, with Bob James for many years, with a lot of different folks. But he has a different style of leading, This is a little less loose because this music is pretty intense. The Crosswinds music is very composed, and Billy's, recomposed and rearranged a lot of it. And so
I did catch a good chunk of the sound check, and you guys weren't just blowing. Everybody was like fixated on the music, on your music stands. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right, and it's a big part of what Billy's going for, and so it's been a little bit of a different experience in that way. But at the same time, Bill is playing with Joe Zawinul was a wonderful but honestly pretty stressful experience.
When were you there? Because I interviewed Scott Henderson a while back.
Just after Scott.
Okay. Was Gerald Veasley in the band?
No, this was with Paco Seri and Matt Garrison.
Oh, that's right, Matt. Okay.
Yeah, it was a good band. And Bill is great. He's easy to work with. I think there's a lot of learning curve for everybody in the band, including Bill, in terms of reworking this music and putting it together and trying to create an experience that is, respectful of the tradition and the history of that album, Crosswinds. But also, renewed and renovated, So it's an interesting process, and we're having fun. And, when Billy first called me, I said, hey, I do the rock and roll thing, but that's not really my first choice. He's like, I don't want you to do that. I want you to, bring the jazz guitar. And so that's been interesting to try to, envision this music more through the perspective of a jazz guitarist rather than a rock fusion guitarist,
Does he ever break out any of the old stuff? I can't help but think of Spectrum because it's such an iconic album. Would you?
We definitely play Stratus. We'll play Stratus tonight. We'll play a Little Red Baron. We'll play Torian Matador. Some of those things. Oh yeah, they're fun. Super fun. I got a lot of space.
I had the privilege of interviewing Lee Sklar, I think about 3 times. And the one time I interviewed him, we just talked all about the 40th anniversary. It was around that time. And Ron Carter's on that album, too. Yeah. What else is keeping you busy, Farid, other than Billy?
Oh, man. Well, it's a long list. And it's a good time, but a time of transition. I was professor of guitar at Northern Illinois University, and I'm retiring at the end of this season. So I started when I was pretty young, and I've been touring and teaching for 30 years, and it's been exhausting. Probably taken a couple of years off my life, and so I'm gonna retire, and then I have a lot of opportunities. I'm working with Garage Mahal again.
Oh, right.
And we're doing it.
Kaya Card.
Yep. Alan Hertz, who plays with Scott Henderson, and Eric Levy, and that band is going to be touring again. My own groups, we have a number of tours coming up. I have a duo with Goran Ivanovic, and we're heading to Europe. We're heading to China. I'm working with a multimedia guy. We're doing shows in planetariums that are like world music shows with 360 light and sound.
Wow. That sounds like a throwback to the 70s.
It's cool. It's super cool. But with laser technology, it's updated, and I'm arranging a Chinese opera. So yeah, it's a full plate, and it's a good time.
And it's quite a swath, quite a spectrum of stuff that you're doing. Tell me a little bit about your gear.
Well, I am kind of a gear nerd, but not in the sort of typical way. I'm primarily an acoustic guitarist and a classical guitarist. And so my interest in electric instruments has always been in instruments that are dynamically responsive, which has meant, jazz guitars typically, but jazz guitars typically don't work in a loud musical context. So I've had some custom built arch tops that are a little different, no F-holes, arch top flat back, built by Brian Gallup. And he's built the guitar that I'm playing tonight, as well as 3 or 4 other arch tops. Use Diodario strings. Hendrickson amps right now are great. They're actually, this isn't official yet, but there's work of a prototype that'll be a small amp that I can travel with that has tube and solid state circuitry. But right now I'm using their Baby Bud, so my amp travels with me. It's like, smaller than a bread box.
I've had the pleasure of meeting with Peter, right?
Yeah.
Peter, from Colorado. Yeah, very, very good guy.
No, and they've worked with me a ton. I basically gone out to the factory and played their amps and stuff, and wasn't a super convert at first. We kind of had to figure some things out on how I worked, because I'm more of a tube amp guy. I'm the old Fender guy, and I always have been. But we found a way to kind of make this work for me. And then I emailed them one day and I said, hey, I'm doing a lot of touring. Is there an amp that you think might work for me? And then I got an email back from Peter, who's very friendly, but we got you covered. And I was like, well, I'm not sure what that means, but I'm sure that'll be fine. And about a week later, they showed up in my driveway. And I've been using it and really kind of enjoying it. It's what you sacrifice sometimes in terms of the vintage tubes and things. I think you kind of make up for in the consistency. Because, playing with Fender Twins every night, I love a good twin, but how many twins are good out of 10 when you're on a backline situation? You show up at the gig and they bring you an amp, and who knows what's going on with that amp. And you put a 57 on it, and you get it through the monitors, and after you're done with it, what are you really listening to?
But you can say that almost about any amp, couldn't you?
For whatever reason, I think because of the small speakers, you don't have any buildup in the bass, and it mics up like instantaneously. Like they put a 609 on it or a 57 if that's all they got, turn it up. You heard the guitar sound check today. It was like they turned it up. I was like, done. There's none of this, it's got too much 2K and it's got this and tweak this and bring this, I can't hear it. No, it's just like, They turn it up, you know. So it's been a really good experience so far.
Well, good. You mentioned everything from Joe Zawinul to a Chinese opera and all kinds of stuff in between. Is there anything that you've always wanted to do that someday you're going to do it, but you just haven't gotten around to it yet?
There are a number of projects in the pipeline, and my sort of plan as it unfolds is, now that I don't have to do the teaching thing as much, I can focus on those projects. So, but they're pretty obscure, and they're not really the kind of thing that.
Why does that not surprise me?
Right, So I transcribed a number of pieces by an obscure Catalan composer named Federico Mompou. He wrote a bunch of music for solo piano that was called silent music, and it's kind of a long story, but at the end of the day,
Wish my kids would listen to some silent music sometimes, but I digress.
this is mysterious and really amazing, spacey and sort of impressionistic northern, Catalan music.
Piano music that you transcribed for a guitar?
Right, and it's gorgeous. So I want to record those pieces. I've done a number of transcriptions and arrangements of classical music. So those are all coming, some of them are recorded and just have to be mixed. Some I need to actually go and record.
I saw a YouTube video of you playing Stardust.
Oh, yeah.
That was cool.
Well, that's one of the other projects is to do a series of solo jazz guitar recordings, particularly solo jazz guitar recordings that are more oriented towards improvisation and less oriented towards, a lot of great fingerstyle jazz guitar players come up with these arrangements, and that's what it is, and they play it the same way every time. But there really isn't the spontaneity that a piano player might bring to it. So we're talking about doing a live album at Smalls of all jazz guitar. And then I'm actually starting another project, which we've worked with a little bit, recording the music of Franz Casellas, who was a Haitian composer from the 50s, was Marc Ribot's teacher.
Wow.
And Marc sent me all of his music to play about 10, 15 years ago, and I kind of read through it, and I was like, this is cool. But over the years, I kind of got to understand that there was another element, which was the Haitian groove and the sort of Afro-Caribbean rhythms that were in this music. And I started playing this music with my band, and it's really cool.
Wow.
So that, and the other thing that's on the pipe is I've been learning and arranging a lot of more classic Latin tunes. If you look at the history of jazz guitar, there's a conspicuous vacuum because there are no jazz electric guitarists from Latin America who play Latin American music. There's a couple. I don't want to say there's none. I would never say that. But the tradition of jazz, Joe Pass, Tal Farlow, Pat, Grant, Wes, the list gets long, Jimmy Rainey, Kenny Burrell, go down the list. There's a million great American jazz guitarists and European jazz guitarists who played American jazz music, right? And all of the jazz guitarists that came out of Latin America either tried to play like Americans, played American music, or they played Spanish guitar. But there's very few who actually played electric guitar. So who's the only guitarist who played mambo in or who played manteca on jazz guitar? Not rock guitar, but jazz guitar. Wes. He's the only guy. Who else? Maybe Kenny did a few Latin things.
Detroit.
Right?
He's from Detroit.
Right? Yeah, no, totally. Detroit, this is a crappy city, but it produces some funk.
I have to stand up for my city. It's come a long way. It's getting better.
Coming from Chicago, I can say that because we got our issues, But it's the Midwest. You got to love the Midwest. That's what makes. We all work hard, and at the end of the day, like I said in the beginning, people say, "Where are you from?" And I say, "I'm from Chicago." They know where you're really from. I say, "No, I'm from Chicago."
That's usually the line for people from L.A. Nobody's from L.A. No, I'm from L.A. Last question, Farid. If you can imagine, what would you be if you weren't a guitar player? And it has to be something outside of music.
Probably a scientist, paleontologist, probably. Really? I've always loved history. And I think one of the reasons
that's about as far back as you can go.
Right. Well, no, you can go further back. You can go into pre-Cambrian right? History before life on the planet. There's, paleo, before there was life, right? So that's like before there was bacteria. There's all that history too of the birth of the planet. So you could go back further, but I digress. But yeah, my dad's a scientist, and I've always been a history buff. And I think part of the reason that I play so many different styles of music is because I've always been interested in the history of the music. And the history teaches you a lot about the music, much more than practicing in a room in front of a mirror does. So you start to understand the history of the music. You understand the history of the blues, man, it fixes your bebop in a second.
Yeah.
You understand the history of bebop, you can start to play soul jazz. You understand that history, then James Brown starts to make sense. And you understand Baroque music, then Romantic period music makes sense. There's all these connections, and the more you understand the history of the music, the fewer uncertainties there are, because there's a lot of simple and clear and honest answers in the history of the music.
You're obviously a very deep thinker, and as I'm listening to you, I'm coming up with more and more questions that I could ask you, but we do have a limited time. But maybe you opened up for a follow-up interview, and maybe we can talk about some of those other projects that you mentioned, and who knows where the conversation will lead. But Fareed Haque, it's so great getting to meet you in person after all these years. Back 1992, boy, that was a couple of years ago. And
Speaking of paleontology.
looking forward to the show tonight, and keep us posted on all that stuff, and we will impart all that good information to these nice people here. Backstage, downstairs in the basement or wherever we are, at the underneath the Jazz Cafe at the Detroit Music Hall with our special guest Fareed Haque. I'm John Liebman. You're watching for GuitarPlayersOnly.com.